Hello, everybody. It's another episode of Topline, I believe episode 78. Asad 78?
79.
79, Maron. We've got a special episode this week because we've got Kyle Norton, CRO of Owner.com, the new host of the Revenue Leadership Podcast, the co-chapter head of Toronto for Pavilion, and a leading figure in sleep and diet.
Exercise.
Yeah, exercise.
Kyle
Not
has
so
this
leading revenue.
he has this wild record going of, I think, probably now 500 days in a row where he's worked out, which I think is bananas.
Wow. Do you
Almost
drink alcohol?
700, coming up on 7.
Do you drink alcohol?
Not as much anymore.
Yeah.
But his parents own a wine business.
Yeah,
Wow.
they're in the wine adjacent industry, bottles and decoration for wineries. Yeah, and I'm not a big wine guy, so.
All right. Well, you want it more than me. That's what that's the realization. whatever it is, you want it more. Let's hope we're not going after the same thing. That way.
Yeah. Our mutual friend Scott Barker would call it the sickness. I have a bad case of the sickness. Yeah. Whatever it is, I'll go at it hard.
Welcome to Topline, the podcast for the best founders, operators, and investors in B2B tech. Every week, AJ Bruno, Asad Zaman, and me, Sam Jacobs, will break down what's important for you to know to be the most well-informed professionals in the market.
This episode is brought to you by Bizzabo, the go-to solution for managing B2B conferences and events. Plan, promote, and produce events that engage your audience and drive revenue, all from one easy-to-use platform. Learn more at bizzabo.com. That's bizzabo.com.
Welcome to the show. We launched, when people are listening to this, it's been 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks of the Revenue Leadership Podcast. I heard the first episode with Lemkin. Incredible. And we're just glad to have you here. And we're going to be talking about some of the things you talked about there and maybe some other themes. Asad, why don't you kick us off?
I think we have to start with the Lemkin episode, but we've got other fun things to talk about today as well. The Lemkin episode was the first of the pod, but I have probably heard everything that Lemkin has put out. Kyle and I share love for podcasts. I think other than me, he's the only other person who listens as much as I do. I had last year close to 50,000 minutes listening to podcasts on Spotify. He had more than me. And so we've both heard Lemkin a lot, but I think this was one of, if not the best conversation with Lemkin. He spoke about things that we've not heard him talk about ever. And the one that really, I think, struck people was this takeaway around boards and CEOs not being out to get CROs. And the point was that, Kyle, we want you to get us to $1 billion in revenue. There's no one that's trying to fire you. It's so hard to find you. And once we have you, we want you to run as far as you can. But there becomes some moments where you have to rethink things when a person stops performing or when a person starts looking scared, which I thought was a really interesting point, that you've gotten to, let's say, X amount of revenue. The next jump is really big. You have to double it. And there's just a little bit of fear in the eyes, 1 board meeting, 2 board meeting, 3 board meeting. And then you do start asking questions. So he did give reasons when boards and CEOs will start questioning if we've got the right person, but the desire is to hold on to them. And this, obviously, it felt great listening to it, but is it really true? Becomes the question. And I think, Sam, I'm dying to hear your point of view on this, because Revenue Collective was started off with this ethos that, or at least that's how I read it, which was the world is out to get CROs. So let's us band together and help each other run this race together. But Kyle, let's start with you. What's the response to this been like? Because I'm sure this was very activating for some VPs of sales and CROs who have been fired and who do feel the world was out to get them in those instances. What have you heard from everyone?
I've heard opinions all across the spectrum. I think a lot of folks and it was a little bit bifurcated by maybe even like quality and skill. The really great CROs that I know that I respect a lot generally really appreciated the message, and it was heartening for them to hear that that does make sense. Like, why would a board want to get rid of me if I'm good and stage appropriate and I've got room to run? I also heard some feedback where people were like, I don't trust it, that's like VCBS, and like I've been turfed out. And I think the hard thing to internalize is maybe it's not them, it's me. When Lemkin was talking about this whole thing around fear is sort of the end of you as a revenue leader. I was personally afraid of the number that I was given in 2019. And I was like, we got no shot at this. This doesn't make sense. I don't think we've got a plan. And CEO for sure would have sensed that. I made the decision myself. I was like, this plan is nuts. I'm going to go do something else. And I left that company. But I so resonated with that comment around fear because I felt that versus going into next year, 2025 with owner full of confidence. And so why wouldn't the board be confident in that? And so, yeah, the reception has been mixed, I would say. But my takeaway is maybe that has a little more to do with us than it is.
I think there's another nuance to it, which is spectrum of companies. I think great CROs and great company, maybe that's the dynamic where it doesn't play out the same way. But what if like there are a lot of companies that are not flying, that don't have amazing board members, that don't have great CEOs, where the CROs are not all that great? Put those things together and how does that play out is probably like the other set of it. Sam, you give us your thoughts on this. Come on.
First of all, the distillation of the argument to like boards are out to get the executives of a company is enough of a simplistic distillation that it doesn't really have a lot of meaning, because of course they're not. Of course everybody wants the company to succeed. The idea that that would just be their sort of like nihilists and capital destroyers. Like they want to blow up companies, so they get into this. That doesn't make any sense. So then the prevailing, of course. So that's thing one. Thing two is, yes, 100%. There's definitely people that are not qualified for the role, in whatever role, whether it's chief revenue officer, chief product officer, chief marketing officer, whatever, CEO as well, that need to get fired because they're good for one part of the company's growth and they're not good for the other part. So some part of that is very natural. The reason that we created Pavilion and before that Revenue Collective is more because there just wasn't an opposing voice. There wasn't any balance to the conversation. I think, and there needs to be balance, because the reality is that just as there are many mediocre CROs and there's many great CROs, there's many mediocre board members and there's many great board members and there's many mediocre CEOs. And I think the challenge and the issue, at least as I try to articulate it out to the market and the ecosystem, isn't like don't fire people. It's that everybody needs to have enough business acumen to have good judgment. And that what I'd seen is that when a company wasn't doing well, the first person to be blamed was the sales leader or the revenue leader. And I honestly have had these conversations. I've had many of these conversations with early stage founders that constantly say the reason that they didn't perform well was the sales leader. And if they just find some heroic, legendary sales leader, we just need to find the person that has exactly this experience. And then they articulate a set of filters that make it impossible to find that person. And if we only had that person, then everything would work out. And of course, that's not true either. So it's not that I disagree. How can you disagree with Jason saying that boards aren't out to get you? Of course they're not. Everybody wants the company to succeed. We all have a vested interest in the success. The point is, the countervailing advice that they're often given, which is to have a very short time horizon on evaluation. It's what you said on the pod, Kyle, which I thought was really interesting. And I guess he moderated that a little bit, maybe. But you said like the first 2 months were down after you joined owner. And we've all read that blog post where he writes that, if they don't make an impact in the first sales cycle, basically it's never going to work out. And so the point isn't that boards are out to get us. The point is there needs to be a counter argument. There needs to be a debate in the ecosystem that goes against that perspective, because that's because we're talking to somebody who is both, Jason is one of his biggest fans, and also he completely refutes the idea that, everything has to improve immediately from the moment that you join the organization. So, as with all things, I think it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than just like good guys versus bad guys and like, hey, everybody, they're not all bad guys. Some of them are nice. Yes, we know some of them are nice, and we know that we all want the companies to succeed. The point is their business judgment. The point is the collective organization's ability to diagnose problems, which is also the conundrum that Kyle talked about, which I think, is one of the more, and he articulated actually on LinkedIn, today or yesterday or whatever, which I thought was really good. He answered you, Asad, which is the other thing that jumped out, I think, Kyle, from, the show was, if you ever blame the product, you're a P asterisk SSY, like you're weak, and you're lame and you're a loser. And actually, what he said was, you're a loser. He said you're a loser, and
he's so intense sometimes. I love it.
well, it's great. It's a great framing, right? Because it enables you to react in a very productive way, even if neither he nor you like fully believe 100% of it. He understands that, if he believes 85% of it, it's better to say it that way and and drive the point home.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's the same thing. Like, is it true that the product is never wrong? Of course it's not true. Is it true that sometimes they overhired and there's a go-to-market motion that is more sophisticated than the product's ability to retain the customers? Yeah, of course that's true. But it is also in how you talk about it. So as with anything, I think it's a little bit complicated, but I think that there is just as much fault to go around for CEOs and boards that in the ZERP era, they didn't know what they were doing either. And they were hiring people that were not the right fit for the company at that stage. And they were quick to blame. And I think that in general, there's just not a lot of patience. The whole point of his blog post is like, if you don't change the whole organization by changing the sales cycle in like 30 days or 2 weeks or something, if you don't feel an instant change, you've made a mistake. That person's a loser. Get out onto the next one. And maybe he's moderated that perspective recently, but my experience, and maybe I'm just a slow grower loser, maybe I'm a loser, and maybe Pavilion's a lifestyle business, and, all I do is take naps and kick my feet back and, smoke weed and whatever. Maybe my experience is that like things take a little bit longer sometimes, and that like building the plan and executing the plan and sequencing the plan takes a little bit of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the lesson for both sides is really a deep understanding of false attribution bias. When things are going well, everybody assumes it's them. And when things are not going well, we're revenue leaders, founders alike are want to cast blame externally. And if we can on all sides try to collectively orient around the common objective. We're trying to grow the company, dispassionately talk about the challenges in front of us, whether it's go-to-market efficiency, product performance, churn, and just have an objective conversation about the facts as opposed. And if your team is the thing that is deficient, being open about that and having honesty in that conversation, then you can get to a much more productive place. I think like what doesn't help oftentimes is everybody's defensiveness to say like, my thing's great. My part's doing great. It's something else. And if we can get to a place of trust, if we go back to Lencioni's pyramid, the foundation being trust, if you can get to trust that, hey, we're going to have an open dialogue, we're going to conflict with one another in a productive, open way, going towards a common goal, then you can get to a much better outcome. And I'm actually writing about this for the Topline newsletter as a jumping off point from the podcast. So that'll be tomorrow.
The other thing I will strongly agree with him on is, and I don't even know if you guys talked about this in your conversation, but I was just at dinner literally last night with 3 CROs. One runs a $40 million business, another $110 million business, and another $70 million business. And 2 of them had just had the worst quarters in the history of their company, and one of them was doing great. And these are all people that I would consider talented. And I also think we have to recognize that the job is harder today than it was 3 or 4 years ago. We have the environment, the operating environment is more challenging. And we have to recognize that we are in a different, the degree of difficulty because of ZERP going away, because CIOs aren't buying, because of people's attention spans waning, because GTM efficiency is deteriorating. I just think that it's a harder operating environment, and there's a lot of and what's my point? There's a lot of people that thought that they were really good that are in retrospect not very good. And I'm not saying the people I was at dinner with were not very good. I'm just saying that it's a harder job now, and there's a lot of people that were, that they got the CRO title when they were running a very small business. They got the VP of sales title when they were, and then you anchor on that title and you think, this is who I am. I am this person, and we're in a new world. And I've seen, and the best people, or in one way, like the people that have whose character I admire, are the people that are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to go be a director at XYZ company. I'm going to be a director at Salesforce, because maybe I was just a little over my britches. And the truth is, I don't know, super complicated multi-stakeholder 12-month sales cycle enterprise sales. And maybe it's time that I learn that as a tool to add to my skill set. And I'll come back to being a VP or a CRO later, but for now, I need to burnish, the skills that I have in my toolkit.
When we talk to companies about hiring CROs, one of the things we spend a few minutes discussing is, who do they think is absolutely amazing? Because no matter what you scorecard, you do all these things, mentally you do compare to who you think is the best you've ever met in that particular position. It's this thing humans do. And it's really interesting that a lot of times they'll point to somebody that you look at and say, oh, interesting. If that's the best you've ever met, we actually need to first change that in your mind. We need to make you meet somebody amazing who might not be the right person for this role and for your company, but we need to change what you think amazing looks like. So then you kind of click into that and you say, well, why was that the case? Are they just crazy? They couldn't be crazy. They've built it with software. The company is doing well. They have good investors. So there's not I assume that on the opposite end, the person's not crazy most of the time. So it's like, well, what happened? Well, they met that person when that person was actually doing really well. And so they sat down with the person, likable person, but was doing well. And I think what that tells you is that there was a time at which a much larger group of people were productive than they can be today. So I think if you put percentages on it, and I don't know if these percentages are true, but I think that probably 20% of CROs out there could do business in ZERP. And when I think of ZERP, it's not just 21, 22. I think that entire 2009 till 2022 period, they could drive results. There were a lot of companies that during ZERP were showing go-to-market metrics that would indicate they were selling a mission-critical software. There was one company that was in this HR space, very quirky DEI type of tag. And their numbers were just amazing. You were like, wow, this company is on fire. And then the market turns and they're no longer on fire. And so I think there are a lot of people that could be productive when the cost of capital is zero, that can't be productive right now. And there's a cleaning out that has to happen because of that. The other side of it is that there are still unreasonable people out there. So there's one company that is probably on every list of the 20 best startups in the world. Series C, doing really well. Best investors, just this company is flying. And they had a CS leader who delivered, I think, 120% net revenue retention in 2023. And this is a single product company. And the CEO was railing at this person for not aiming for 140% the net steer. But they're like, but we have not much else to sell these companies. And they're like, well, why aren't you aiming for what Snowflake does? And so that's an unreasonable conversation to me. If the only way to increase your contract size with a customer is by selling them more seats, there is an upper limit to how much you can grow that account. And so there are unreasonable people out there. Kyle, on the point that Sam was touching on, which is the second part of that podcast that really stood out, which is the product conversation. CRO should not be talking about product. Don't bring up product related to results. What he said. Related to results in a board meeting.
Yeah. He said, don't blame the product.
Don't blame the product.
I think that's the distinction in the text messages I got that were in the most disagreement, I think also got this a little bit wrong. where it was like, well, I'm the CRO. How am I not supposed to ever talk about product? Like, this is a conversation we need to have. And I think I went back and listened to the clip because a bunch of people had messaged me about it saying sort of weird, different things. And the point Jason was saying is, don't blame the product. Don't make that your excuse of why you couldn't do your job. Either the product doesn't work and just go somewhere else. Like, why are you the CRO at a company where the product doesn't work? And this goes back to Sam's point around image. It's like, because this is the only CRO job I could get, and it's at a crappy company with a crappy product, but like, I don't want to go be a director somewhere. There's a lot of that. But the other piece of it is like, blaming the product doesn't help you get closer to your shared mission. There could be a conversation about product feedback and the integration of go-to-market strategy with product strategy. Like, are you trying to go to the same market that the product team knows that they are building towards? Do those goals, those TAMs overlap properly? It's not about not having those discussions. I think those are the discussions we should be having as executive teams all the time. But you can't get in front of the board and be like, I can't do my job because this product sucks. Because
I think that's completely
you're throwing your hands up and you're saying, it's not my fault. I can't fix it. And then why are you in that job?
I think if a person is bringing up the product in relation to performance in a board meeting, that is a confidence losing moment. But I do think it highlights a little bit of the dynamic between CROs, VPs of sales, go to market in essence, and the CEO. And I think it speaks to feedback loop, which is that if things are going well, we can have all the conversations we need to have, right? It's easy to have conversations that are tricky when things are up and to the right. But there are more companies that are not up and to the right in a straight line than there are. And so there are many quarters, many months where things are a little bit precarious. And during those moments, people do feel scared in go-to-market teams to talk about product, to bring it up at all. But in fear that it might sound like an excuse, in fear of. And I do think that plays out a little bit. And so my challenge over here with it is that I actually think this is a problem for CEOs. This is a dynamic set by the CEO, right? Like, you have to create feedback loops. And what better feedback loop about your product and product market fit than your go-to-market team that spends the most amount of time with the customer and understands the customer and is hearing about the competitors and why we're winning and why we're losing, what they like and what they wish we would, the problems we wish we would solve. All of those things, I think, come out of a go-to-market team, which is probably the team best suited to tell you if you have product market fit or not, or how much of it. But that feedback loop is not a strength in these companies right now. We can some people are very strategic and tactful and know when to have it and how to have it, but it's not a strength in most startups that these teams speak about product in a really robust manner. Would you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think many revenue leaders are good at structuring and communicating this feedback in a way that will be well received. Oftentimes it's like too direct, it's combative, it's done in a sort of a wrapper of excuse making, and it leads immediately to this thing in psychology called reactance. Anytime we feel like we're getting cajoled or manipulated into something, we have an immediate reaction to try to find our freedom of choice again, and our freedom of and the things that revenue leaders should do. If you want to be a great partner, there's like 3 things. And I used to be horrible at this, and I made everything combative, and it was my opinion versus the CEO's opinion, like early in my career. And I worked with an exec coach to figure this out. And the 3 things that I took away were: 1, you have to be completely dispassionate about it.
Yeah.
You're just discussing the facts without trying to use us and them language, and it's just about problem solving. 2, don't socialize these ideas in big groups. So definitely don't say something in a board meeting that you haven't had a bunch of private conversations
Or in the
one-on-one.
executive meeting. Like, take a minute.
Yeah, don't. If you have a big like hot take or a big product insight that you want to share this with the CPO and the CEO in your weekly one-on-ones. Have a discussion, have an open conversation about it, as opposed to dropping this in a big group meeting that gets everybody's back up, and it's hard to get people to listen to that insight. and then you want to speak with data. Like, what is the data? Because as revenue leaders, what we often do is our product roadmap requirements are just like the last thing that the biggest customer told you. And so you're just launching at the CPO or the product leader the last big thing that a big customer asked you for. And then you lose your credibility because you're not being thoughtful about it. You're not thinking about, well, how much of the market is this relevant for? Is this just this one-off? And so if you can be dispassionate, talk about things in small groups before big groups, and lead with data, you can get to a much better spot without everybody feeling like you're excuse making and attacking and getting into an us versus them type of scenario.
I think that I agree obviously with everything in fact, I coach people on this through CRO school all the time because we're always talking about unit economics and, does the plan line up to what the business is indicating is possible given the unit economics? And they often say, well, how do you have this conversation with the CEO? And I say, make it about the data. Don't make it about you. It's not me versus you. This is what the business seems to be indicating. If I'm wrong, let's figure out where I'm wrong. And I completely agree. I think the thing that weakens, that Lencioni trust pyramid is the tenure. Is like it's just really hard, and all of it requires judgment because what you want to be able to do is have a lot of productive conflict oriented not conflict oriented, but you should be able to disagree and commit. You should be able to have different points of view on what the business should do, and then everybody should be able to align around it. And you should be able to also have conversations about things that might take longer than maybe the time horizon or the patience of either the board or the CEO. But all of that is weakened when you feel like if you have one bad month or quarter that you're immediately on the chopping block. And I don't know a way around it because there's no easy answer because he's also right. I found, a couple of the other things, the fear is something very, very real.
Yeah.
And it was really fascinating at dinner. I didn't mention this to the person that was sitting across from me, but they literally told a story that happened to me in 2017, so 7 years ago, where they looked at the pipeline in August. Everything looked fine. They got back from August vacation and Labor Day holiday. Their upside and their basically like their upside forecast that was the padding that enabled them to hit the number had completely evaporated. Now we're 2 weeks from the end of the quarter and they have to spring it on, the CEO and the board that they're going to miss meaningfully when before, a month earlier, they hadn't been able to give that guidance. And that's a kind of situation that's terrible for job security. But fundamentally, I think I don't know of an easy way to build trust so that we can all weather the ups and downs of the business and do it as a team so that we can all disagree and commit and know that if I disagree or if I express some hesitation or some consternation about a specific near-term target, that it doesn't mean I'm immediately, as Lemkin said, right there, we're going to, in the closed room session, after everybody leaves, we're immediately going to start talking about the management team and whether or not, they're capable of doing the job or not. So there's no easy answer. It comes down to judgment, but it's this tension of I want to be honest, I want to be constructive, but the reality is people like me get fired all the time, even if, nobody wants to.
Are you coming to GTM 2024 in Austin, Texas? It's going to happen October 14th to 16th. I'm Kim Scott, and I wrote Radical Candor and Radical Respect. At GTM 2024, I'm going to be diving into how you can solicit feedback. It'll give you the opportunity to read minds. How you can give both praise and criticism, and how you can gauge how what you are saying is landing and make corrections so that you can have better conversations. Whether you're looking to improve your relationships at work or improve your results at work, this session will equip you with the strategies to excel in 2025. So don't wait. Get your ticket before they sell out. You can get it at joinpavilion.com/GTM 2024. And as a thank you for being a Topline listener, you will receive an extra 15% off your ticket with the code Topline. See you in Austin.
There's also the fact that, so whenever we place hundreds of executives and leaders every year now, and it's about 40% of our business is that search. And it's rare that they are talking a lot about how to hold on to the person they're replacing. And it's usually like we've hit this stage, we're optimizing for the next stage, but it's not a huge conversation that, what are the different options we have available to keep this person because we really like this person. And I don't think that's because people are bad people. So I've been thinking about after the podcast as to, well, that's not my experience. I don't hear, and maybe that's not the conversation they're coming to have with me. But we talked about it a lot. And so it would make sense if that was a thing they were trying to solve for, that they would ask that question. Because they asked a lot of other questions you wouldn't assume they would ask. And so I think also what plays out is over many quarters, couple of years, there are good moments and bad moments. And in organizations, there's conflict. And so these relationships that develop, there's good parts of it, there's rough parts of these relationships. Not all relationships are just up and to the right as well. And I think by the time a company comes to the point where they're optimizing for the next stage, I don't think holding on to the last leader and finding a soft landing for them within our org and caring about their career, I just don't think those things are as top of mind as it ends, as it is in the beginning. In the beginning, the conversation's, and this person can join, and then this is going to happen. Listen, we'll hire a CRO, and then this person can learn from that CRO. And all that happens a lot at the front end of it when you're hiring a person, but it doesn't happen when you are talking about replacing a person. So there's something interesting that plays out over that.
Hopefully CEOs can hear this from you and from Lemkin and others and make a change there, because I think it's really valuable, that institutional knowledge, the stability, being able to
absolutely
layer somebody and have that be a smooth, seamless
Think
process.
about this. So we've come out of these markets where companies used to double in employee size every year. What's the average tenure of a company that doubles its employee size in a year? 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane. So year after year, your average tenure is 6 months. And so it makes it really hard to have institutional knowledge, to have these type of relationships. It almost becomes critical that you find a way to hold on to some people for 4, 5, 6 years that can hold on to that essence, that je ne sais quoi that the business had initially that was really powerful. It's very hard to hold on to it in these companies. Now, here's where things are evolving for the better. It's rare that companies are doubling in employee size at the volume that they were doubling. In 21 and 22, almost everyone was trying to double the employee. People are more, I don't think everybody is seeing the revenue growth potential and results that lead to that type of growth plan. There are much fewer companies that are able to activate that type of growth. And I think people are also a lot more measured about headcount growth than they were before. So maybe this will improve over time. It is improving a little bit. But back then, it was just really hard to hold on to those things.
Jack Altman talks about, the founder of Lattice, talks about this a lot. He's got a good podcast where he touches on it, the value of those incremental third and fourth years compared to the value of the first 2 years. Even if you think about sales reps, think about their incremental value in months 1 through 6 versus months 18 to 24. If you can extend people to 24, 36 months, it's a very meaningful.
Additional month on reps is massive for team performance and for productivity. It really, for ROI perspective, it's huge, but it's really hard to do with reps.
Yeah.
The other thing we should touch on is something we've been testing about. It's a fun topic. It's RevOps. And kind of speaks to a little bit of what we're discussing over here.
What do you know about RevOps, Asad? You don't know anything. You probably never.
There was a post on LinkedIn. This non-operator, the audacity of this guy talking about something he's never done. Doesn't know anything.
You're just stupid.
So these are the posts that have been
not
going
only
around.
are you dumb, you're conceited, you're arrogant.
Arrogant, audacious, non-operator.
I'll tell you one thing you can't say about you, that you're unattractive. You are an attractive man.
Most good-looking person in tech. At least I hold on to that.
Non-operating, attractive.
I'll take it. If that's what I had to take, I'll take it. So, Kyle, it's actually really interesting because after that podcast, you and I were chatting with AJ was in there as well. And then there was all this chat that was happening outside. And so this is a fun topic because I think we are slightly on a different page with it, but probably closer than we think. And so the point I was making, and I was harsh with my words, but I do stand by the point that it's a support function that when implemented well is a force multiplier. It can make teams more productive, more efficient, all of those things. I believe in those things, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a support function. And I don't believe that this support function should have a seat at the executive table, which is a lot of the conversation that was happening within these communities, that we deserve a seat at the table. And I think
the chief revenue operations officer,
something like that.
It doesn't even make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Like, firstly, I think, so I've got many thoughts on this because I've pondered it, but I do think that a strong advocacy for RevOps and its utility would be useful on this part. So obviously for you, it's been massive. You've used it really, really well. Talk to us a bit about how you're thinking around how to implement and leverage RevOps as a support function has evolved and all the great ROI you've gotten from them.
I think maybe people are just getting triggered by the support word. Support is a good thing. Force multiplier is, I think, a more accurate description for RevOps.
That sounds very powerful.
Yeah, it is
literally the words I used on the last one. I went back and listened to it. I said force multiplier.
Yeah, and are you going to have a C-suite RevOps person? Probably not. But does that at all diminish how critical this is as a role? No, I think it's one of the most important things that I have built my teams around is a high pedigree of operational proficiency. I invest in RevOps teams much, much earlier than most people would. Like, I've worked with my RevOps leader now on and off for 8 years. Most of the 8 years we've worked together now across 3 different companies.
Wow.
Because he's my right-hand guy. He literally operates as an extension of myself. He does the whole RevOps thing and runs the stack and tooling, reporting, the whole soup to nuts thing. And also because he's so deep in working with me and understanding the guts of the business, can be somebody that people go to for answers on a whole ton of stuff. When they need a call and they don't want to bring something to me, like Steve is my stand-in and he'll make decisions on a whole wide range of things. He's probably a bit of a unicorn. He was a sales leader and then grew up into RevOps, and so has a very nuanced understanding of, hey, we're not just building tools and slapping in validation rules and required fields. We are here to build a platform that accelerates our reps and gives us better data to make decisions on. And he understands that reality of the rep more than others. But I would say, like any function, there's good and bad. But if I was allocating across a leadership team where you want superpowers, RevOps would be like all the way up there in terms of a role that I would invest in heavily.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's this support function conversation's interesting. So if
we're all support functions. I'm a support function.
Well, not really, actually. From an organizational design perspective, there's the main thing and there's the support. Legal, finance, HR, these are support functions. Sales, go-to-market essentially, and product are the main things. We make the thing, we sell the thing, right? Like that's the main thing. And then these are designated as the support functions. Doesn't mean they're not important, because can you run your team without HR and finance and IT? Of course, this company can't function properly once it has some credible size. It needs those support things. It's supporting the main thing, which is we, as a business, the main thing is what do you build? And then selling that thing that you build. And so
now let me piss off a whole group of people. and if I had a certain amount of budget to allocate across HR or RevOps, I would put 80-90% of that to RevOps. Like,
I don't know why some companies have HR.
You can't run a company without HR. I mean, you sort of can.
I don't have any HR.
Yeah.
But you don't have a company because you're not an operator.
I'm not an operator. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. I should not have opinions.
Yeah.
This is a interesting rabbit hole. We can piss off a lot of people right now if we all just start taking poops on HR people.
Maybe
Not
especially
on the
this
people.
guy who's in
Not the
recruitment.
people, just the function. It's not that they're bad people. They're doing something that's completely useless.
Both our businesses are going down after this one. But yes, keep going. Go on. This is an interesting thought.
There's a different level of like, are you a mission critical force multiplier? RevOps, absolutely. And I invest heavily into that function. HR is like more a pure support function. There's not a lot of incremental value added to the enterprise value of the company. RevOps, for my company, has added tremendous enterprise value because my reps, I know, are 2 to 4x more productive on a per person basis than all of our competitors.
And when you say that, Kyle, because I think, as I said last time, I think like the biggest challenge with RevOps is that the definition is still somewhat ambiguous. So when you're saying that, is it data quality and sort of like the act of mapping and identifying the territory that makes, because you've mentioned to me, like your high dial to connect rates,
lead scoring and routing and enrichment. Yeah. For me, the most important things RevOps does is, you could call it territory management, but I don't care how territories are carved up. I think that's much less important than people give it credit for. But how are you supplying your teams with high quality accounts, with a high propensity to buy, with high quality data, so that your BDRs and AEs aren't spending a bunch of time doing data enrichment work? What is the set of tools that they use to do their jobs with a lot of effectiveness? That's the sales acceleration stack. That's the automations that you build into Salesforce and other platforms. It's stuff like the AI simulation tools we use. Like we use this company Ramp Systems to run like coaching sims. How does that plugged in? How do you get that enriched? It's that set of toolings, and then it's business process. Business process, I think, is like an underappreciated drag on an organization.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fight over what's a squo? How do you dispute what's a squo and what's not a squo? If you don't have a good process for it, then your managers get into it, and then I'm making a decision, and it's just this like, this downward spiral. Versus if you have like clear rules of engagement, you have systems to deal with, how quotas are set and how we communicate it. All of those things are organizational lubricant that makes everything run faster. And it's underappreciated how much the business process piece of things can slow things down. Those are the things for RevOps that are important. And then reporting, like what's the information that myself and the leaders look at to know and understand where we need to take action? What are the scoreboards that the reps have access to so they can self-manage and understand where they're going and be motivated? Those are like the biggest things that we spend a lot of time and investment on.
How do you get data alignment if you've got ARR data, new business data? Is it to make sure alignment with finance and the parts of the organization that are also responsible effectively for business reporting, but aren't part of the revenue organization? Is that ever an issue, or it's not really an issue?
So we work hand in hand. The RevOps team works hand in hand with BizOps and data. So there's certain pieces of that stack that they own. They own single source of truth, and making sure that feeds into all of the surfaces where that may be exposed, Salesforce being one of them. So they have that accountability.
Fair enough.
I think when there's actually, this is almost a bit of a philosophical conversation around what you believe is the best way to run a business. And so that point around the seat at the executive table, it feels like people are not understanding what they're talking about, because you either believe in having a very lean executive team because you believe decision making will be faster and better when you have less people worrying about something and talking about it, or you believe that more cooks in the kitchen lead to a better roast. And you have to pick a school of thought. And so I come from the school of thought that a very lean executive team is what you want to optimize for. So by default, that means that I don't believe partnerships should have a seat at the table. I don't believe that solutions engineering has a seat at the table. I think go-to-market has one seat at the table, not 3 seats at the table. I believe in that because I believe in the value of a lean executive team. I also think
disagree.
people,
That's totally fair.
That I think that's an important distinction. The other one is the support functions versus the main functions. So I think when companies are large enterprises, I think those support functions become larger and provide a lot of value. But I think on the journey to becoming an S&P 500 business, you want to keep your support functions as lean as possible because they are also cost centers. And so you want to keep HR lean. You want to keep your legal lean. Maybe you don't even need a legal person. Why does a $5-10 million company have a chief legal officer? You don't need one. General counsel. You will outsource that stuff. One of the hypotheses that we had coming into 2024 was that there's going to be a shift in how companies look at HR internally. So we looked at this data, which was tracking what are the most laid off positions in 22 and 23. Number 1 was internal recruitment. And then number 2, 3, 4 were all marketing roles. And we said, okay, what's happening here and how might this play out? And our hypothesis was that if you look at how a company grows, there are inflection points where lots of hiring happens. And then there's kind of your averaged out hiring that happens through the year. But there are actually these inflection points. What was happening in pre-2023 was that you were building internal teams to handle as much of that inflection point hiring as you could handle. So Kyle is going to need to hire 30 people in Q1, 40 people, 50, 100 people in Q1, depending on what type of company it is. Let's make sure we can handle the majority of that in-house and then outsource as little of that as possible. But what that ended up meaning was that you had these heavy cost structures, fixed costs, that were really high, and were not being utilized during those non-inflection point months and quarters. And so you were just, it was a P&L risk and it was badly utilized. So we thought the future is going to be a much leaner team internally that's not built for hiring peak levels, but is just built to coordinate, manage your normal HR processes, and look to outsource as much as possible. And that is literally how it's played out. Our clients, for the size that they are, like when I look at a company, let's say a Series B company, the HR team we're dealing with today is a fraction of the size of the HR team that we dealt with from 2009 till 2022. And it's pretty consistent across, hundreds of clients. And so it does seem like businesses are evolving a lot. Sam, does it feel like that? It feels like that to me. How does it feel like to you when you're talking to people, CEOs and CROs, about how they're thinking about designing their businesses? Lessons have been learned?
I do think lessons have been learned. Have you learned? I've learned some lessons. I know you've learned some lessons. AJ's learned some lessons. The other thing that happened, this is all of a piece, and I guess there's a part that maybe is cyclical, but I don't know if you can credit like the rise of the All In podcast potentially, but certainly like hearing Chamath every week saying like he doesn't understand why HR teams exist has influenced some of my thinking. I can also say that there was this, space to fill in a vacuum where the job of the HR team seemed to expand into areas that were non-mission critical. And I realized that at times where I would see just things that weren't core to the operations of the business now being part of like key strategy. And I think a lot of us have figured out that you can do more with less, and you have to figure out what's actually contributing to like the growth of the machine. And listen, I do think that you need a function, an HR function. I think, for companies of any meaningful size, I think people need a place to forward feedback so that it can come and be synthesized and aggregated through somebody that, so that they feel safe and they can share feedback about their manager and they can share feedback about how it feels to work at the company. Even if you choose not to act on it, even if you don't think it's important or critical, it's important that you know that it exists, and it's important to create psychological psychologically safe pathways for people to share that feedback. I really do believe that. But I don't know that that means that you need a 4-person HR team. I will say that, one of the things Ben Horowitz always talked about, and I've just seen time and time again, is that once you staff a function, once you staff everybody wants direct reports. Everybody wants a team. The minute that you give any function one person, they want 2 people. Who was it? I forget who was it. It was somebody at Andreessen, I believe, but it was somebody talking about the minute that you hire an internal GC is the minute that you hire a second associate counsel. And pretty soon the legal team is 15 people. And you're like, how did it get like this? It's like, because everybody wants their people. Everybody wants a team. Everybody wants resources. And that's where our jobs as, executives and CEOs are, but especially CEOs, our job is to hold the line and to understand, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And we're not going to do that because, like I've been saying, probably, I don't know if I've been saying it on this show, but, we're making significantly more revenue and profit at Pavilion. And we literally had 62 people in January of 2023, and we have 27 people, full-time people today. And now you can say, well, what the hell were those other 35 people doing? And, they were doing a lot of stuff that felt very important at the time. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks they're doing something. Yeah, exactly. So does that answer your question, Asad?
It does. It's really, so we have what you were talking about in HR, but we have it outsourced. So they have like anonymous places for feedback, all these things, but there are just a lot of amazing service providers that give you a lot of these things. And some of them you need in-house, like if you are a SaaS company raising venture, you probably need finance in-house. You don't want to outsource that past a certain point. But I think outsourcing, offshoring, AI, automation, this is how you find margin in your business. This is how you give yourself flexibility and some cushion. And organizations need to really think about these things, but they don't. Sam and I were talking to a company recently that had a 6x burn multiple, and you would think that that's not sensible, but it happens. And so yeah, it's not as easy.
There was a really interesting episode of Lenny's podcast yesterday, I think it was, with the president of product and technology from Glean. And she was the CPO from Slack previous, Tamar, I can't remember her last name. And one of the most interesting points she made was, you don't have to be well run to be successful. She's like, I know a ton of amazingly successful companies that are not that well run. There's
Google in its early days was not a well-run business, and it was a wild place.
And if you think about it, okay, if you are growing at a very modest clip, 30% year over year, you're like juggling 3 balls. Now you want to grow 200% year over year. Now you're juggling 6 balls. A lot more stuff's just going to get dropped because of the sheer volume of trying to add that much headcount, ship that many projects. And it's natural for the highest growing companies to feel the most the most confused and chaotic. And I thought that was a really interesting point. You don't need to be well run to be successful, and because you see it a lot.
That's the power of extreme product market fit.
Like
extreme product market fit is like, when you're driving those cars and there's that NOS button and it just takes off, like that's what it is for a business. And it's much harder to find when we think it's just this thing that you get and you keep, and that it's something that happens at the early stage of the business. But if you really obsess about it, it's probably, if you took a chart and on one axis you had importance and the other was the lack of understanding, probably up and to the right is product market fit, is one of the most important, most misunderstood concepts. But when you look at the examples of companies that were able to stomach a lot of pain, a lot of thrash internally, and still come out with amazing outcomes. Actually, if you look at in every platform shift, there seems to be one almost trillion or $1 trillion company that's come out of it, right? Cloud and internet. And if you look at most of them in their early days, they were quite wild and chaotic internally.
I mean, do any of us think that OpenAI is well run?
Oh my
internally,
God.
Do you think any of the
wild place that one?
Yeah, it's wild. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I mean, maybe it matters a little, and we'll find out if they're worth $150 billion and all of that. But like, I am sure, and this is one of the shocking things that employees don't seem to understand. That's the other thing that's come sort of crystallized to me over the last couple of years is just all of these employees. Everybody thinks that they understand what makes a company work. And there's a lot of people that are just obsessed about culture and how easy is it for me to give feedback to my boss, and how good is the career pathing, and do they have the right benefits, and was the boss nice to me, and did I get to take the right amount of vacation, and how much did I feel supported, and I was at an offsite and they asked me an uncomfortable question and I answered it, but then I realized that I shouldn't have answered it. And it's like, and all of these people think that that's what makes the company work. If only they fixed all those things, if only you'd felt better at the offsite, everything would have been up and to the right. And they don't understand. And I've seen it just come back to me so often that it's not that. I just remember being at GLG and things were skyrocketing and we were making so much money, and there was just a group of people that liked to speak poorly about the company internally, and they got off on it. They got off on being negative. They got off on articulating how, and they thought it made a difference. They thought if only everything had worked perfectly well and the OKR process had run perfectly, that would have meant the company would have grown another 30%. And I just think, to your point, Asad, product market fit is the most important thing, and both and it's not an. I don't know that I've ever met a company that self-reports as being incredibly well run.
No, and it's easy to sound very intelligent by being very pessimistic.
Yeah,
it's just that's this thing, right? But it's the optimists who shape and change the world. It's optimists who run businesses, because we understand that if we're going down this path, it is going to feel intense and chaotic. And the job is to create some order out of this mad chaos that's going on. And you can't perfect it. But if you can get the product right, it gives you a lot of cushion. On the OpenAI front, Sam, I actually think it's probably the most fair valued company in the AI space right now. Because I was looking at their revenue projections, and they're projected to do $12 billion in revenue next year. And based on how their revenue has been growing, seems like a realistic next step in their revenue. So $150 billion valuation makes them cheaper than most of the other AI startups that are raising venture. It makes them cheaper than Anthropic. It makes them cheaper than literally any other Series A till Series D startup in the AI space, which is fascinating with that lens. I'm thinking I've just signed up for Forge, which allows you to buy stock into some of these startups. And I think this is a very interesting market. I want to get into it a bit. But I think they're actually fair valued. Like, it's a fair valuation.
I think it depends on the margin profile, because I think they need just enormous amounts of capital, and I need to see a gross margin positive business that doesn't require owning all of the world's data centers in order to deliver the results that they deliver. But what do I know?
But that might not be the right metric to evaluate OpenAI. They're playing a completely different game. They're not playing a gross margin game. They are playing a winner take all race to AGI. If you get to AGI first, you are the first ever $10 trillion company. So,
but I think that the bear case against what you just said, Kyle, is like, as everybody, I'm just only parroting what other people say, which is like, unless they have different data than the rest of every company, like unless they know something that we don't know to build their models on, all of the models will converge. This is the point that Asad has made, right? That the fastest they spend billions and billions to build GPT, Chat GPT-4 or whatever, and then it's worth basically zero within 9 months. And so it's not clear. And we spoke to Benedict Evans recently and felt like, I don't even know if he was judging us. I don't know that he thought us worthy of consideration in any regard, whether or not he was judging us. But But it's not clear that there's network effects to the business. So it's not clear that it is a winner-take-all business. But what do I know?
Benedict has the easiest job in the world. Just ask all the questions and you get paid.
And then he reframes it into an abstraction. That
and an abstraction, and then this, and then tell a historical
Maybe that's not the right way to think about it. That's
and then this, and then you're done. And I just made a bunch of money. I'm good. I'm going to do that past 50. That's going to be my job 50 onwards. I'm going to do 10 years of that. It's the
I want you to be on every podcast and just be typing and clearly not paying attention.
Say the same thing in every podcast. It's a very easy job. Very easy job.
Asad, did you send me the Scott Galloway optimism as a default setting article?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The
quote by Josh Brown.
Yeah. The quote from that JP Morgan says to the sort of pessimist bear that he's talking to is, the funny thing about all these skyscrapers is that none of them were built by a bear.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting context here. It's like, yeah, you could be bearish on all of this stuff and pessimistic and be right a bunch, but ultimately,
and you sound so intellectual. Like it's such an intellectual exercise, and you kind of sometimes sound crazy. Listen, at the worst of a downturn, when you're still being optimistic, you sound a little bit crazy, but that's the crazy that makes our world better.
I just think exactly to your point, Asad. It's just it's so nobody gets challenged. Everybody can be like, well, obviously the world is terrible. I'm like, well, I don't. How can you say that? It's
Do you know how it's not
obvious.
terrible? Sam, check this out. I was reading this thing today. In Japan, what do you think is the probability of a woman born right now in the 2020s living till the age of 65?
The probability?
92%. 96%.
Let's go. That's close. I think that's pretty close.
Wow.
Imagine what mortality used to be like 100 years ago.
Imagine what it used to be like giving birth.
Yeah.
It was a freaking crapshoot.
Yeah.
You did not, it was half 50-50.
Yeah.
No antibiotics, no sanitation, bacteria everywhere. Anyway.
I was talking to a friend of mine. I was debating him because he was like, there's no such progress. There's no what is this progress? Planes and like one of those where it comes from a big consulting firm. And again, it feels very intellectual saying these things. But when you actually look at how the world has evolved, even in just the last 100 years, it is just a much better place to live in than it was a very short time ago. And just in this world, like I grew up in Pakistan, now I live here. There's a significant difference in the quality of life. You see the progress, you see the change. And just the fact that the chance of a person living till 65 is 96%, that is bananas. I think the chance of them living till 20 is 99%, meaning a girl born right now living till 20, 99% chance she gets that. That's crazy. So.
Yeah, just send them Steven Pinker's book. The whole argument for you. And
what's that book?
Enlightenment Now. It's basically the case for why the world has never been better and why we should be.
Yeah, people are like, why would we bring a child into this world? I'm like, because it's awesome and we want to perpetuate the human race. And conscious life in the universe is clearly pretty rare. So maybe we shouldn't let everybody down by not doing it.
Okay, on that positive note, we're going to end this on a positive note then. Time for shout-outs?
Shout-outs, wins of the week.
Kyle, guest, why don't you go first?
I'm going to shout out the Pavilion marketing team.
Oh, let's go.
Cullen and Kathleen and Jeremy, the whole squad, because they were amazing to work with on the launch of this podcast. The reason I partnered with Pavilion is so that I could have somebody that knew what they were doing and had capabilities to make this thing go. And the team did not disappoint. They've been amazing to work with. Cullen, I think in particular, deserves like a extra big shout out because this thing wouldn't have happened without her. And episode 1 was great. I'm stoked to drop episode 2 with Kevin Dorsey on Wednesday. So that'll be out by the time you listen.
Yeah, it'll be out. And then who else is going to be on the show? It's exciting.
Deanie Mehta, who was the CRO of Lattice from single digits to over 100 million. We talk multi-product, how to go multi-product, because they went from 1 to 5 products under her. And Jack Altman did a cool SaaStr talk on going multi-product. Then the CRO of SalesLoft, Mark Niemczek, on organizational transformation, because obviously they were bought by Vista, going through a bunch of stuff. It's a really good
And
one.
he was brought in by David Obrand, right?
Yeah, he's Obrand's guy.
Is he amazing? Because I can imagine David being good at hiring a CRO.
I thought I texted you after just being like, yeah, SalesLoft's going to win.
Oh, yeah, you texted. You're like, if I could buy stock in this company, I would.
Yeah. And then we've got Mark Roberge coming out, talking about a bunch of stuff. Yeah, it's an awesome lineup. Asad, we have spent over an hour just going deep on hiring, how to think about sales hiring, frameworks, things you can apply. So
most good-looking man in tech will be on it. Look at that.
Yeah.
Great looking, arrogant, non-operating.
Audacious. Yeah. I'm going to make that my LinkedIn thing.
Go deep. Like the whole thing is like we just did an hour and a half with how to frame hiring sales reps with Asad. We went organizational transformation for 90 minutes with Mark Niemczyk. And so we really get into the weeds and share some practical stuff. So shout out to all the guests too. I'm doing multiple shout outs. I apologize.
No, it's good.
Let's go.
Shout outs. It's a great time.
Let's go. So excited about this. Cullen is such a gangster. Like she really does help with all these things so much. She also helps me with the newsletter a ton, and without her it wouldn't be possible. So shout out to Cullen. I'll go net some, then you can close us off. I've spoken a bit about my journey with sleep on this podcast, and Kyle and I were talking about it earlier today, so I'll just speak to it here, which is that I've struggled with bad sleep for most of my 20s and 30s, and I've been trying to scratch at it from different angles. I have now had more than 2 weeks where my average sleep score is in the 90% range, which was unheard. Like I was a 60, 70% type of guy, and this has just been life-changing. And turns out the blocker, the unlock was how much protein I was having. And so basically for a person of my age, my weight, and the amount I work out, I should be having like 160, 165 grams of protein a day. When I calculated how much I was having, it was like in the 60 gram range. And so I was just mad. My body was just eating muscle. My sleep, I was like, it was just falling. I was a malnourished nutcase. And that's why I was sleeping badly, dreaming badly, just grumpy as hell. And so I just upped it. And it's so different. I feel like a different person. Because when you sleep, like you really do.
What's your best way to get more protein? What do you do?
I'm just I can't eat a lot. Like, listen, I eat like a bird. But I do take 3 scoops of protein a day these days with a big glass of milk, and it tastes amazing. And that's 75 grams right there. So then I need to find the rest in food, and it's working.
That's great. That makes me happy. Well, Kyle, I'm going to give you a shout out. Thanks for building the Revenue Leadership Podcast. Thanks for being the chapter head in Toronto. I think Toronto in many ways is like a template for what we want the rest of the chapters to be like. And so I know you guys have done some incredible events. Thank you for that. I also want to give a shout out to Cullen. Cullen was the very first person we ever hired after Andrew Seam. And she was the very first enrollment manager, along with Shinhee, who also still works at Pavilion. And so talk about institutional knowledge. Cullen's had pretty much every job. And it's really been awesome to see her take to content marketing and to influencer marketing, creator marketing in the way that she has.
That's why she gets it.
It explains a lot. That does explain a lot. She's just zipping around. I'm like, man, we just talked about that an hour ago. And then she sends me a thing that's done. And
when I give her the newsletter, she'll jump in and she'll see if I've made any grammatical error or something. And one of the things that you're always trying to calibrate is when do you explain an abbreviated term versus not. So ZERP, we don't have to explain what it means, right? GTM, we don't have to explain what it means. Whoever's reading this newsletter will understand that. But then some of them, you're kind of a 50-50 on it. And she is an amazing thought, but she'll always flag the one that she's like, I don't know if they get this one yet. Maybe explain it a bit. And she's always right about it. So now it made so much sense. How many years is that, Sam?
Since right before COVID. So
wow,
2020.
Yeah, 5 years almost.
Yeah, almost 5 years.
Brilliant.
So pretty cool. Yeah. Shout out to the rest of the Pavilion team. We just had a great September. Just barely second best month ever. It was about to be the best month, but and there's only 30 days in September, so it's kind of hard to do that. And we got a great conference coming up in Austin, and the two guys on the show right now will be there. And looking forward to seeing you all. So thanks for listening. Kyle, great job on the new podcast. Colin, thanks again. Asad, I was kidding. You are a good operator, and
You weren't kidding about the good-looking part.
Well,
That's the main part that matters, Sam, for vain people like me.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.
thanks
Bye,
for having me.
everyone.
This episode was brought to you by AirCall, the business communications intelligence platform. Deliver a better experience for your customers and your teams at AirCall. That's AIRCALL.io. Save time, save money, and improve performance with a single communications platform.
Thanks for listening to Topline. New episodes come out every Sunday. If you like what you heard today, subscribe so you never miss an episode, leave a 5-star review, and share it with your friends. Don't forget to join our Topline Slack channel to connect with us and discuss the topics we cover with other listeners. Click the link in the show notes. Lastly, if you're interested in joining Pavilion, you can learn more about membership at joinpavilion.com/membership. Thanks again for listening.